What's going on, guys? Michael Anthony here. I wanted to make a quick video here to go over my first impressions with the Sony A7R Mark III. Today we had an opportunity to get this bad boy out into the field and run it through its paces. I practiced today with it on my wife rather than with a paying client. Tomorrow we have a wedding and I probably won't be bringing it out there just yet until I can get a little bit more familiar with the camera, right? For those of you guys who don't know me, I'm a wedding and portrait photographer based in Los Angeles, California. I write articles monthly for Shutter magazine on the topics of lighting, posing, and some business articles as well too. Back in July, we switched from Canon to Sony primarily because the A9's autofocus system lured me away from the Canon system that I've been using for a very, very long time. I ended up purchasing an A7RIII primarily for portraits, and it was an amazing camera. We got some incredible photos with it, but a couple things always bother me with that camera, primarily the autofocus, right? The lack of dual card slots, the battery life, and the ergonomics. Those are things that a lot of people complained about. And I'm really happy to see that Sony actually listened to a lot of the complaints and rectified a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them in the A7R III. A couple things that I really love about this camera right off the bat, guys, the joystick that they added, okay? That makes changing the autofocus points so much easier. You're not having to push 2 or 3 different buttons just to get to the menu, okay? The other thing that I love is the battery life. This camera uses the same battery that's in the A9, which is already a really good battery. So a lot of the things that people were complaining about with Sony had to do with the battery life and not being able to use it for a long event. We shot a wedding on Friday night using 2 A9s. I changed a battery 1 time at the end of the night. Jennifer changed her battery 0 times. So we got through the event pretty much on 3 batteries between 2 cameras, and that's pretty good. So I'm happy to see that this camera uses that as well too. So I want to talk to you guys real quick about some of the shots and some of the tests that we did out here. We put this camera through its paces primarily in use of its mechanical shutter function today, because that's one of the things that I really love about what they did in the A7R. See, the A9 has a 5 frame per second maximum on the mechanical shutter function, meaning if you're using this camera with flash, in a high speed flash like a ProPhoto D2 or an A1, it's going to be hard to for you to be able to get the best benefit out of the camera's capabilities, because it can't shoot that fast, right? 5 frames per second isn't bad, but 10 frames per second is excellent. And oftentimes, guys, we're out there shooting during the receptions, or we're shooting during the ceremony, and whenever we might be using flash, we might need to be able to get a little bit of extra juice if we're shooting through a particular sequence of moments in order to make sure that we're capturing that one decisive moment that could be that incredible photo that ends up in our client's album, okay? So they added 10 frames per second into the shutter function, and I will say that the mechanical shutter on this seems to reset quite a bit faster than it does in the A9. This is, again, a non-scientific test, just my first observation and impressions, and I really, really dig it. I think it feels good in the hands as well too. One of the things that they also improved in this camera was the addition of the dual SD card slots. Now, they didn't put the high-speed slot in the number 2 position here. They put it in number 1, but they didn't use it for both, which is a little disappointing, but it's not the end of the world here, because we do have data redundancy in camera now, which is really important, especially if you are a wedding photographer. So I'm going to take you guys into my screen here. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more about how we went about getting this shot today, and then I'm going to show you some of the way that the camera was able to keep up and do some amazing stuff while we were using it in a high motion sequence today. What's going on, guys? Got everything loaded up here into Capture One. At the time of this recording, Adobe does not support the A7R III in Lightroom, although that is something that they will add very, very shortly. I do happen to like Capture One a lot more. It's a lot more customizable. There's a lot more things you can do in terms of colors. And I do feel like it is the most advanced raw conversion software out there on the market. So I don't mind using it. Unfortunately, I don't have a Capture One based workflow. So we are still using Lightroom for the majority of our tasks in the studio. But going through these images here, a couple things I wanted to showcase, right? I was having Jen twirl around and basically trying to make the camera lose focus on her eye. For this sequence, we were using eye autofocus. Now, what ends up happening here is when the eye is no longer visible, the camera will lock focus on whatever your focus point was previously set to before it had acquired the eye. the camera will go back to that focus point. I use the A7R and the A9 on continuous autofocus mode on the lock-on small point, and that'll help to track our subjects for the majority of situations. Sometimes I switch it over to single point, but for the majority of the time, I am using it in that continuous mode. Again, it's a very different system than what I was used to with Canon, so it just seems to work, and I do love the functionality that we're getting. But as I'm having her twirl around here, showing you guys a couple of things, as she turns around, you can kind of see how we lose focus here, right? Because now the camera's trying to find, her eye is trying to find the closest thing to where my focus point was, because it doesn't see the eye anymore. But as soon as she comes back around here, you can see that it locks focus right back on that eye, right? So this is one of the things that I absolutely love about Sony cameras. I mean, I think that the autofocus is incredible. And now that we have a solid portrait camera in the A7R III, it really does complete the roundup for a professional working photographer. Being an event photographer, I will use a combination of the A9 for the documentary stuff and then the A7R III when we get into our portraits right here. So a couple more sequences, guys, I want to show you real quick. In the beginning of the shoot, I actually had Jen walk into her camera. I wanted to see how this camera would track her as she's moving. I know the A9 can handle it, but I wanted to see how the A7R III would do it, right? So you guys can see right here, we're lock focus on the eye. And as she's walking toward camera, she's walking away because I'm going backwards here. But as she's walking toward camera at 10 frames per second, that's our family pictures you guys got a quick glimpse of here. As she's walking towards camera, she is completely in focus. When we got to the portraits right here, this is static. And I'm having her look at the camera, right? I'm using eye autofocus, and I'm having her move slightly just because I wanted to test the functionality. So we're shooting this at 1.6. As we were shooting all of the sequences that I showed you, we were at 1.4 to 1.6. And you guys can see here when this renders how sharp her eye is, right? The camera does an incredible job of keeping focus on the eye, even when she's moving slightly in between shots. Now, when I was shooting Canon, the 85 1.2 is one of my most favorite lenses. It gives beautiful color, gives beautiful rendering of the bokeh, but it cannot autofocus for the life of it. And that was the biggest problem for me as a wedding photographer, because the 85 is one of my go-to lenses. I am happy to say with Sony, that lens, the lens speed and the ability for the camera to use eye autofocus is just incredible. So we rendered out this image right here into Photoshop. And inside Photoshop, a couple of things we did to this edit just to give you guys an idea, right? A lot of this color toning happened in Capture One. And when we brought this into Photoshop, what I did was I darkened down, I selected and masked off the background, darkened it down a little bit, added some blue to the highlights, some orange to the shadows, and then we did some dodging and burning on her skin to give it a little bit of that metallic look. Did some cleanup, basic cleanup using frequency separation, and then just a little bit of liquefying to the hair in order to give it a little bit more shape. All in all, we were done with this edit in about 5 to 10 minutes, and I'm happy that throughout an entire session, we're able to capture and keep more pictures. But I'm really impressed with the dynamic range and the color tonalities that are in the A7R III. So I'm going to do a more detailed review on this camera. This is a quick review I'm doing at 9:50 at night. Just because I wanted to give some people out there my first impressions who are considering buying this camera or who are on the fence. Thank you guys again for checking out this video. And if you liked it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we're going to be doing a lot more stuff with that in 2018. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night.